The prairie was a wide, lonesome ache that morning. A sky the color of bruised silver hung low over the Mercer ranch, and the wind carried a taste of dust and winter ash, the kind that seeps into a man's lungs and settles there, heavy as guilt. Eli Mercer hadn't slept in 3 nights. The child's cries came and went like waves breaking against stone. Weak now, smaller each time. He sat hunched over the cradle, his rough hands trembling as he dipped a rag into a cup of watered-down milk and pressed it to his baby's lips. "Come on, Rose," he whispered, voice breaking. "Just a little more." The baby's lips fluttered against the cloth but refused the taste. Her cheeks, once flushed with her mother's blood, had gone pale as candle wax. The only sound was the faint hitch of her breath, a sound that tore through Eli worse than gunfire. The cabin smelled of smoke, stale milk, and grief. Every corner carried Mary's ghost, her shawl hanging by the window, her Bible open on the table, her hair ribbon tied around a bedpost. He'd buried her 3 weeks ago beneath the sycamore, where the earth was still too cold to dig deep. And now, the child she left him was slipping through his calloused hands. Eli stared out the window, where the horizon burned orange beneath a dying sun. The land had gone wild since she passed, fences torn, cattle scattered. He didn't have the strength to chase them anymore. The neighbors whispered when they saw him ride into town. "Mercer's losing it," said old Martha Doolan behind the counter of the general store. "Man's cursed," another muttered. Eli heard them. He just didn't care. He'd buried the best part of himself with Mary. The night fell cold, hard, and long. The baby's crying turned to shallow whimpers, like the whine of wind through a broken fence. Eli lit a lamp, but the flame flickered as if refusing to stay. He pressed the back of his hand to Rose's chest. Her heartbeat fluttered weakly like a trapped bird. And then he broke. He took his shovel, stepped out into the dark, and began to dig, not knowing if it was madness or mercy driving him. The ground was hard, the frost cruel. Each strike of metal against earth echoed through the quiet, through his ribs, through the miles of emptiness that made up his life. "Forgive me, Mary," he whispered into the wind. But the wind gave no answer. He dropped to his knees, chest heaving when the sound came, faint at first, then clearer, the sharp knock of knuckles against wood. He froze. A voice followed, trembling but strong. "Sir." "I heard the crying." Eli turned, shovel still in hand. The lamp by the door cast its glow onto the shape of a woman, wrapped in a shawl, her hair wild from the wind. Mud clung to the hem of her dress. She looked half-starved, half-lost. But her eyes, they were full of something he hadn't seen in months. Life. "I ain't here for charity," she said quickly, reading the suspicion on his face. "Only heard a baby in trouble." Eli's jaw tightened. "You from town?" She shook her head. "No town left for me. Name's Clara Wynne. Been walking 2 days east, looking for work. Or something close to it." She shifted the bundle in her arms. Not a child but a worn satchel. Her dress was dark with dampness at the chest, a sign that made Eli's breath catch. He realized what she was, what she could offer. His throat tightened with pride and shame all at once. "We don't need." But the baby cried again. Weak, desperate. Clara's eyes softened. "She won't last the night, not like this." Eli looked away. "I can't ask that of you." "You're not asking," she said quietly. "I'm offering." For a long moment neither moved. The wind beat against the cabin. The lamp flickered. Then slowly Eli stepped aside. Clara entered. She smelled faintly of rain and salt tears. Her hands trembled as she reached for the child, but her touch was sure, the touch of a woman who'd once known cradle songs. She sat by the fire, unbuttoned her shawl just enough, and brought the baby close. Rose whimpered once, then latched on, a small sound, fragile and holy. Eli turned away, ashamed by the relief flooding his chest. He stared at the fire until his eyes burned. Clara hummed under her breath, a low, wordless tune that filled the silence with something almost like peace. When Rose drifted to sleep against her, The cabin seemed to breathe again. Eli spoke without turning. "You got folks?" She shook her head. "Not anymore." "What brought you out here?" "Loss," she said simply. "And maybe hope." He said nothing. Outside, the storm rolled in, whispering against the plains. Inside, two strangers sat, one hollowed by grief, the other hollowed by hunger, and between them a child sleeping in borrowed arms. The fire cracked softly. Clara looked down at the baby, then up at Eli, her eyes glistening in the lamplight. "Don't send me away tonight," she said gently. "Just till morning." Eli's jaw trembled. He wanted to refuse, to protect the last pieces of pride that still clung to him, but the sight of Rose's tiny chest rising steady in Clara's arms broke him again. He nodded once. "Thank you," she whispered. Eli sat back, staring into the fire as the storm thickened outside. The wind moaned through the cracks of the cabin walls like an old lament. But inside there was warmth again, faint and flickering. When he finally looked up, Clara had drifted to sleep by the cradle, baby still nestled against her breast, firelight painting her face in gold. Eli whispered to himself, almost a prayer. "Maybe mercy does knock. You just have to be desperate enough to answer." Morning came pale and cold. A thin mist curled across the prairie, wrapping the land in ghost light. Inside the cabin, the smell of milk and smoke lingered, the kind of scent that belongs to both beginnings and ends. Clara Wynne stirred awake to the soft weight of the baby against her arm. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, only that she was warm, and that a small heartbeat pulsed steady against her skin. Then memory returned, the long road behind her, the man with grief carved into his face, and the fragile child who had clung to life through the night. Eli Mercer was already awake. He stood by the window, coffee steaming in a tin mug, the light catching on the stubble of his unshaven jaw. He looked older this morning, not from years but from what the night had taken and given back. When Clara rose, the boards creaked. Eli turned, hesitated, then spoke softly, as though afraid to break something delicate. "You can stay a day or two more. Till the storm passes." Clara nodded once. "Thank you." No more words were needed. Out here, words were scarce as rain. She set to work with quiet purpose, sweeping, tending the fire, folding the few shirts that hung limp by the hearth. Eli tried to protest, but she silenced him with a look that said she'd known worse pride than his. When the baby stirred, Clara took her again, her movements slow, reverent. Eli watched from the corner of the room, guilt gnawing at him. There was something almost unbearable in the sight of another woman nursing his daughter, something that felt both wrong and holy. He busied himself outside, repairing the corral fence where the wind had split the rails. Each hammer strike echoed through the cold morning, a rhythm of penance. From the cabin, Clara watched him through the frost-glazed window. He moved like a man carrying a cross no one else could see. Once she'd had a husband who walked the same way, shoulders bowed, jaw locked tight with duty. Fever took him fast one summer night, and the baby that came after never cried once. Now she found herself holding life again, but this time it wasn't her own. That night, after Eli came in from the cold, he found Clara sitting by the fire, the baby asleep in her lap. He paused at the door. Her face was soft in the glow, the lines of exhaustion gentled by the flickering light. He cleared his throat. "Town's talkin'." She didn't look up. "They always do. They'll think wrong of it," he muttered, staring into the fire. Her voice was calm. "Then let him." Eli frowned. "You don't understand how folks are here. A woman alone, a man with a baby, they'll." Clara's tone cut through him, steady and sad. "You think I ain't been talked about before?" Silence. Only the crackle of burning cedar. Eli sat down slowly across from her. He rubbed his hands together, rough skin whispering against callous. "Didn't mean to cause trouble for you." Clara's eyes lifted, meeting his. "You didn't cause it. We both just found it." For a long while neither spoke. The fire filled the space between them, and the baby sighed softly, dreaming of warmth. The days slipped by like that. Quiet, fragile, full of unspoken things. Clara began to hum as she worked, the low tune of some hymn half forgotten. Eli found himself listening more than he meant to. He fixed the porch roof, chopped wood, brought water from the well. She mended what she could. His shirts, his hope, the rhythm of his home. But there were moments that cut deep. Once, Eli caught himself smiling as Rose cooed in Clara's arms, then stopped cold, ashamed of how natural it looked. Another time, he woke before dawn to the sound of Clara weeping softly beside the fire, clutching the locket that hung around her neck. He pretended to sleep, giving her privacy, though her grief settled in his chest like a weight he could never lift. By the week's end, the storm had passed, but neither spoke of her leaving. One evening, when the prairie bled into dusk, they stepped outside together. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. The sky stretched wide and endless, a blue so deep it could drown a soul. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter. "Your wife loved this land," she asked softly. Eli nodded. "Said it was her heaven on earth. Used to stand right there, watchin' the sun go." Clara smiled faintly. "It's a good place to love someone." Eli looked at her, then quickly away. "Ain't easy out here. Folks judge what they don't understand." She turned to him, eyes calm. "Let 'em. You can't live through loss and still worry what others whisper." He studied her face. The courage there, the quietness that felt stronger than any sermon. "Thank you," he said after a long pause. "For what?" "For saving her." He nodded toward the baby. "And maybe, for saving me a little too." Clara's voice broke, though she tried to hide it. "She saved me first." The sun dipped low, painting the horizon in red and gold. For a moment they just stood there. Two broken people sharing the same light, the same silence, the same fragile beginning of something unnamed. Later that night, the wind picked up again, rattling the window panes. Eli rose from bed and found Clara still awake, sitting by the cradle. "Storm's back," he murmured. "Storm never really leaves," she said, eyes distant. Eli stepped closer, kneeling by the fire. "You should rest." Clara shook her head. "Can't sleep much these days. Not since I lost him." He didn't ask who. He didn't have to. The fire crackled low, the light painting both their faces in shades of amber and shadow. "You ever think grief's just another kind of love?" she whispered. Eli swallowed. "Every day." They looked at each other then. No words, no reaching hands, just a long, silent understanding. The baby stirred, sighing softly, and Clara smiled. "She'll grow strong," she said. "The land's hard, but it makes sturdy hearts." Eli nodded, eyes glistening. "Like her mama." Clara blinked back tears. "Like her father." For the first time in months, Eli smiled. Not wide, not sure, just enough to let the light back in. Outside, the storm moved east, its thunder fading like a memory. Inside the cabin, a strange calm settled, the kind that follows when two lost souls find shelter in each other's quiet. And in that hush between lightning and dawn, Mercy no longer felt like a stranger at the door. The thaw came early that year. Snow melted into veins of silver across the prairie, feeding life back into the hard, cracked ground. The air smelled of cedar and wet earth, that soft scent of beginnings. Eli Mercer stood on the porch, baby Rose bundled in his arms, her tiny hand clutching his thumb with a will that humbled him. Behind him, Clara's soft humming drifted through the open door, mingling with the wind. It had been nearly 2 months since she'd arrived, 2 months since the night he'd thought the world had ended. And though he never said it, Eli knew the truth now. The world hadn't ended at all. It had simply changed its shape. The weight of eyes. When they rode into town for supplies, the world shifted again. The main street of Red Willow fell silent as soon as Eli tied his horse at the hitching post. Clara followed behind, Rose in her arms, her shawl drawn close. Every step they took was met with whispers. "That's her, the widow who stayed with Mercer. Heard she's been nursing his child. Shameless, both of 'em." Martha Doolan stood in front of her store, arms crossed, eyes sharp as a blade. "Morning, Eli," she said, voice dripping with judgment. "Didn't expect you to bring company." Eli's jaw worked tight. He tipped his hat. "Just here for flour, salt, and silence, if it's still for sale." A few men chuckled nervously, but Martha's glare didn't break. Clara lowered her head, clutching the baby closer, her cheeks flushing with quiet shame. Inside the store, the sheriff, Callan Briggs, stood leaning against the counter. He nodded once. "Heard you've had help out there." Eli didn't look up. "She's done more than help. Saved my child." Briggs studied him for a long moment, then said low, "You owe no one an apology for grace." Then he turned to the gawking crowd outside and added, "And neither does she." The hush that followed was long and heavy. The message hung there. Law spoken without raising a gun. Eli thanked him with a nod, bought his supplies, and led Clara and Rose back toward the wagon. As they climbed aboard, he turned to her. "You don't need to come back here again. Not for their sake." Clara looked at him, eyes steady. "I don't live for their eyes, Eli. Haven't for a long time. To the fire that heals." That night, a strange peace settled over the land. The sky stretched wide and clear, stars scattered like spilled salt. Eli built a fire behind the house, the same spot where once he'd dug in despair. Clara joined him, baby asleep against her shoulder. He gestured to the ground. "Right there's where I thought I'd bury hope itself." Clara looked at the soil, now soft with green shoots. "Funny thing about hope," she murmured. "It don't stay buried if the heart keeps beating." He nodded, then reached into his pocket and drew out a small silver locket, Mary's. The last thing she'd touched before death. "I been carryin' this," he said, holding it out. "Didn't know what for till now." Clara hesitated. "That's your wife's. She'd want it in good hands," he said softly. "In hands that saved our child." Clara's throat tightened. "Eli." He shook his head. "You gave my daughter what life took from her. You gave her breath. And you gave me back something I thought I'd lost." Clara's eyes glistened in the firelight. "What's that?" He smiled faintly. "Belief that maybe mercy ain't just for the ones who pray loudest." She held the locket as if it were made of light. The night hummed around them. Coyotes crying somewhere distant, the wind soft as memory. 3. The storm of truth. A week later, the gossip reached its peak. Martha Doolan sent a preacher out to Eli's ranch, a thin man in a black coat with eyes like cold river stones. He came on horseback, quoting scripture before he'd even stepped off the saddle. "Mr. Mercer," he began, "your household's drawn talk unbecoming of a Christian man. A widow, living under your roof, feeding your child. It ain't proper." Eli's hands tightened on the porch rail. He'd been patient long enough. "Proper," he said quietly. "Tell me what's proper about lettin' a baby starve when a good woman's willin' to save her?" The preacher blinked. "There are appearances to uphold." Eli stepped down from the porch, his voice calm but firm. "Then let the town see this appearance." He pushed the door open. Inside, Clara stood by the cradle, singing softly, Rose's laugh bubbling up like the sound of spring water. The preacher froze. Eli gestured toward them. "That's what decency looks like, Reverend. A woman who gave from her body so another could live. You want sin? Look somewhere else." The preacher lowered his eyes, mumbled a prayer, and left without another word. As his horse rode off, the wind shifted, and for the first time Eli felt lighter. Not forgiven but free. For the long horizon. Seasons passed. Grass grew tall again. The cabin filled with small sounds. Laughter, baby steps, the creak of a rocking chair. Clara stayed. There was no talk of leaving, no need for vows or rings. Their bond lived in the daily mercies. Bread baked together, fences mended, lullabies sung to a child who would never remember hunger. Sometimes Eli caught her staring out at the horizon with that same faraway look, the one that carried all she'd lost. And when he asked what she saw, she'd only smile faintly and say, "Proof the world keeps goin'." 5. Epilogue: Truth stands tall. Years later, Eli's hair turned gray, and the child grew into a strong-hearted girl. When folks passed by the Mercer Ranch, they no longer whispered. They only said, "That's the place where kindness found its home." On quiet evenings, Eli would sit on the porch with Rose asleep beside him, the sky burning gold over the plains. Sometimes Clara would hum that same wordless tune, and he'd think how strange it was, how mercy had come to his door wearing sorrow's face. He'd look out across the endless fields and say to no one in particular, "Truth don't live in what folks say. It lives in what you stand for when no one's standin' with you." The prairie wind would rise, brushing through the wheat like a sigh. And then, as if to himself, he'd whisper the last lesson of his life, words carried by an old soul who'd finally found peace. If ever you find yourself alone, remember this: the world still holds hands willing to heal. Sometimes they knock when you least deserve it. Open the door anyway. The wind bent the grass but did not break it. And in that endless Wild West dusk, where truth stands tall, the land, the love, and the mercy endured.